Picture a raw, violent coastline where survival mattered more than dreams, where cold Atlantic winds slammed into wooden ships carrying people who didn't come to build a country, but to escape something behind them. And that moment, before the United States even existed, is where the real story begins. Long before the flag, the anthem, or the idea of freedom, Native American civilizations had already built complex societies across the land, trading, governing, fighting, and surviving for thousands of years, and their world was forever changed when European powers arrived, chasing gold, land, and control. The Spanish carved their empire into the south and west, the French pushed through rivers and forests, and the British planted uneasy colonies along the east coast, not knowing these fragile settlements would one day challenge the most powerful empire on earth. Jamestown barely survived starvation and disease. Plymouth was built on desperation and faith, and yet generation by generation, these colonies grew tougher, more independent, and less willing to be ruled from across an ocean. Britain taxed, controlled, and commanded, but the colonists had tasted self-rule, local assemblies, and economic freedom, and once people experience control over their own lives, taking it back becomes impossible. Tension snapped into rebellion, and in 1775, ordinary farmers, merchants, and craftsmen stood against professional British soldiers, not because they were sure they would win, but because they were sure they could no longer obey. The Declaration of Independence wasn't just a document, it was a gamble that failure would mean execution and victory would mean creating something the world had never seen before. Against all odds, the colonies won, and in 1783, the United States of America was born, fragile, broke, and surrounded by enemies. The Constitution followed, carefully balancing power because the founders feared tyranny as much as chaos, building a system designed to survive human ambition and failure. But freedom came with contradictions, because while the nation spoke of liberty, millions were enslaved, Native Americans were pushed from their lands, and women were excluded from political life. Expansion became destiny as settlers pushed westward, driven by opportunity and greed, clashing violently with native tribes and reshaping the continent through railroads, gold rushes, and bloodshed. Each new state raised the same terrifying question, free or slave, and the answer slowly tore the nation apart. By the mid-1800s, compromise could no longer hide the truth that the country was split into two fundamentally different visions of America. In 1861, that tension exploded into the Civil War, the deadliest conflict in U.S. history, brother against brother, state against state, with the future of the nation hanging in the balance. Abraham Lincoln's leadership held the Union together, and the war ended slavery forever, but it left deep scars that would shape American politics, race relations, and identity for generations. Reconstruction promised equality but delivered resistance as progress clashed with backlash and the country moved forward unevenly, stronger but still divided. Industry exploded, cities rose, immigrants poured in from every corner of the world, and America transformed from a rural nation into an industrial power almost overnight. Wealth and innovation surged, but so did inequality, corruption, and labor unrest, proving that growth always comes at a price. As the 20th century arrived, the United States stepped onto the world stage, not fully ready, but impossible to ignore. World War I pulled America into global conflict, marking its first major role as an international power. And while the war ended, its impact reshaped politics, economics, and America's sense of responsibility beyond its borders. The Roaring Twenties brought wealth, culture, and optimism, but beneath the surface, fragile systems were cracking, and in 1929, the Great Depression shattered the American dream for millions overnight. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal expanded the role of government forever, proving that in moments of collapse, Americans were willing to redefine freedom to include economic security. World War II changed everything, as the attack on Pearl Harbor dragged the nation into another global war, and this time America emerged not just victorious, but dominant. Its factories fueled the Allied victory, its soldiers crossed oceans, and its influence reshaped the post-war world. The United States helped build the modern global order, but power came with fear, and the Cold War turned the world into a battlefield of ideology, nuclear weapons, and proxy wars. At home, prosperity grew, suburbs expanded, and consumer culture exploded, but inequality and injustice remained unresolved. The civil rights movement forced the nation to confront its own promises as Black Americans demanded the rights they had been denied for centuries, and leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. reshaped the moral direction of the country through courage and sacrifice. Vietnam exposed the limits of American power and trust in government, creating deep skepticism that still influences politics today. The late 20th century brought technological revolutions, economic shifts, and the collapse of the Soviet Union, leaving the U.S. as the world's sole superpower, admired and criticized in equal measure. The 21st century opened with the shock of 9/11, redefining security, freedom, and global conflict once again, as America fought wars abroad while debating its values at home. Social movements, political polarization, and rapid technological change continue to test the system built centuries ago, but the core American story remains unchanged, a nation constantly arguing with itself about what freedom really means. The United States is not a finished project. It never was, and that may be its greatest strength, because its history is not just a timeline of events, but a continuous struggle to live up to an idea that was risky, imperfect, and powerful enough to change the world.